Good evening, and welcome to another live stream from Empty Cloud Monastery. So I'm Bhante Suddhāso, and happy to be here with all of you again. So another chance to practice the path to liberation together. So we can start with doing a few minutes of meditation practice, and then I'll give a talk on the subject of right view. And at the end of that talk, then I'll take any questions that you might have. So please go ahead and get in a comfortable sitting position. I won't give much guidance. Hopefully you all know how to meditate by now. If not, just relax and let go of all things. And that in itself is a meditation practice. So at the start of a period of meditation, it's good to start with checking your posture. So making sure you're sitting up nice and straight in a position that you can comfortably maintain for the whole period of meditation. And once you're settled into position, make a resolution to hold still for the entire time, to let the body be completely still. So when the body is still, then the mind can become still. When the mind is still, then it can see things clearly. So stillness of body is a necessary starting point for good meditation. So settling into stillness, bring a slight smile to your lips. Relax your face, especially your forehead, your eyes, and your jaw. And take a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, letting your body and mind relax completely. Bring attention into your body. So clearly feeling your body as a steady, motionless object, a motionless field of sensation. And settling the mind to rest in the center of that field. Clearly feeling your whole body with sharpness, precision, alertness. Really enjoying the experience of your body. Taking pleasure in this direct experience. Perceiving the body as pleasant. If you get distracted, just immediately drop those thoughts and focus on your body. So in a single moment, you can return to your meditation. Just put your mind back in your body. And just like that, you're back on track. So take a couple of long, slow, deep breaths. You can move your body a little bit. Take a few seconds just to appreciate the peacefulness of the mind. So, this evening I'll be saying a few words on right view. So first I'll start with the traditional verses of homage to the Buddhas of past, present, and future. So please join your hands in Anjali. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. So, right view, in Pali, this is sammā-diṭṭhi. This is the first element of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's also the name of a great sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. And more importantly, it's the name of a critical element of Buddhist practice, a foundational aspect of Buddhist practice. So first, to explain the words a bit more clearly. So the word diṭṭhi quite literally means view. So it's from the verb root dis, which means to see. So your diṭṭhi is how you see the world. It's your worldview, your perspective, your beliefs about the world. And the word samma has a range of different meanings. So one meaning of samma is true. Another meaning is complete. Another meaning of this word is peaceful. Another meaning is harmonious. So the word samma has all these aspects to it. We commonly in English it's translated simply as right, as being the opposite of wrong. And that's a decent enough translation. So it is in fact correct. So sammā-diṭṭhi is a correct belief, a correct worldview. But it's important to keep in mind that the word samma also has these other connotations, these other meanings of not just that something is true, but also that it is peaceful, it is complete, it is harmonious. So it's something which gives a thorough and accurate view of reality, such that we come into harmony with the way things are. And this naturally brings the mind to peacefulness. It naturally generates serenity and tranquility within the mind. So right view has many different components to it. And the Buddha speaks about right view in countless discourses. In fact, you could say that the entire Sutta Pitaka is all right view. It's all a way of communicating right view. And the Buddha specifically defines right view in many, many suttas. And he gives varying definitions, which are all interrelated. So one of the more common ways he defines right view is in terms of karma, rebirth, and attainment. So right view is to be aware that there are such thing as good actions and bad actions, wholesome choices and unwholesome choices, and that our choices inevitably bring corresponding consequences. So good choices bring good consequences, bad choices bring bad consequences, in the simplest way of understanding it. More complex way of understanding it is that a choice brings a corresponding consequence. So a green choice will bring a green result. A blue choice will bring a blue result. So karma is not just a moralistic judgment, but also it's recognizing that we shape our experience of the world through the choices that we make. So this also refers to choices which you might call karmically neutral, but which then will shape the conditions that we experience. But mostly when we talk about karma, we are talking about the moral or moral component of it. So the component of whether something is wholesome or unwholesome. And also in terms of the liberating quality of choices. So there are choices which are wholesome, but which do not lead to wisdom, do not lead to liberation. They simply lead to pleasant experiences. And there are choices which are wholesome and which also lead towards the development of wisdom, which leads towards awakening. So another element of this karma, this understanding of karma, is also the recognition that there are choices which lead to full enlightenment. And this also is an important element of it. If one does not believe in karma, then by default, one is believing that things happen randomly or chaotically, or that things happen based upon somebody else's control. So either control by other sentient beings, or perhaps control by an impersonal natural force, or control by an external deity of some sort. But whether one takes the view of chaos or the view of external control, either way, one is stating that one does not have the ability to shape one's own life. So when one does not believe that one's choices have consequences, then one also then naturally does not believe that there are choices which lead to enlightenment. If your choices don't matter, then there's no such thing as a spiritual path. There's just waiting in the hope that someday you will magically, randomly happen to attain enlightenment. Which actually was the belief of some of the spiritual practitioners at the time of the Buddha. Some of them believed that choice was an illusion, that there was no such thing as good or bad karma, and that all you had to do was just wait. And if you wait long enough, then one day enlightenment will just happen to you, all of its own accord. So that was actually a belief that some people had at the time of the Buddha, a belief which the Buddha rejected. The Buddha was very clear that we do make choices, and those choices are consequential. They do shape our experiences. And there are choices we can make which will lead towards developing enlightenment, which will lead towards the arising of liberating insight. And naturally with the concept of karma comes the concept of rebirth. The idea that we have lived countless lives before this one, and that odds are pretty good we're going to continue to live many lives after this one as well. And the reason for this arises naturally from karma. If every experience is the result of a prior action, then that means that this life is the result of a prior life. And if every choice produces later results, then it follows that the choices we make in this life will produce results not just in this life, but also in a future life. So the teachings on karma, rebirth, and enlightenment are all inseparable from each other. And they're all based upon the recognition of causality, the recognition of cause and effect. So from recognizing causality, then one naturally comes to an acceptance of the ideas of karma and rebirth, and also of the possibility of enlightenment. This is actually notable in the story of when Venerable Sariputta first encountered a Buddhist monk. When Venerable Sariputta first encountered a Buddhist monk, as I remember correctly, it was Venerable Asaji that he met. And the monk gave him a very short, very simple teaching. He said, the Buddha knows phenomena and the causes of those phenomena. So in other words, this person was simply stating that everything has a cause. In other words, that reality is ruled by laws of cause and effect. So the teaching of causality is enough to come to the conclusion that all things are impermanent, all things are conditional, therefore all things are impermanent, are impersonal, they're not self, and that enlightenment is possible through making the proper choices that will eventually produce that result. So Sariputta was able to attain stream entry based just upon this teaching of causality. He was able to extrapolate the direction that the Dhamma moves in based upon just the teaching of causality. And so that's another important element of right view, is recognizing that things do not happen randomly, but rather they are the result of prior causes and conditions. Another very important element of right view, and this is related to this as well, is the Four Noble Truths. In fact, often when you ask people what is right view, then they'll reply, right view is the Four Noble Truths. It's recognizing that there is suffering, there is dissatisfaction and discontent. It is a critical component of the experience of unenlightened beings, is that we experience dissatisfaction and discontent. And that there's a cause for it. So again, I was just talking just now about causality. Nothing happens randomly. Everything that we experience is the result of a prior cause. So what is the cause of our suffering? Why do we experience discontent and dissatisfaction and confusion and pain and misery and so on? And the answer is because of our own desires and delusion. So that cause then produces the consequence of suffering. And when we let go of our desires, then our suffering diminishes. So this is the third noble truth. And it's through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So practicing the Buddha's teachings on morality, concentration, and wisdom that leads us to diminish our desires and therefore to let go of our suffering. So this is the Four Noble Truths in brief. And this also is a critical element of right view. So first off, it's acknowledging the existence of our own dukkha, acknowledging the existence of our own suffering. So Buddhism is not a head in the sand practice of pretending that everything is wonderful and fine and there's nothing wrong. Actually, Buddhism relies upon the willingness to admit that everything is wrong, the willingness to admit that things are not right, things are not good, willing to admit that we do experience sadness and confusion and pain and turmoil, the willingness to admit that we're constantly dissatisfied. Even when we get what we want, we're still not satisfied. So right view is the willingness to admit to ourselves that we suffer, willingness to admit to ourselves our own discontent, our own discomfort, and being willing to admit to ourselves that it's our own fault. Our suffering is our own fault. The good news of that is that if we're the ones who are inflicting suffering on ourselves, then that also means we can stop inflicting suffering on ourselves. Buddhism sometimes gets accused of being a victim-blaming philosophy, but actually it's the polar opposite. It's a victim-empowering philosophy. It's recognizing that by acknowledging our own fault in the creation of suffering, that gives us the power to abandon our suffering, gives us the power to attain awakening. Whereas as long as you think it's somebody else's fault that you suffer, then you will never be able to overcome suffering. You will always be stuck in the victim mentality of thinking that you're incapable of doing anything to break out of suffering. It's just somebody else is doing it to me, so nothing I can do about it. If you have that attitude, then Buddhist practice is impossible. So Buddhist practice relies upon being willing to acknowledge that our suffering is our own creation, and therefore we can stop doing that to ourselves. We can drop our own suffering. So the Four Noble Truths, by the way, the Buddha states that each one of these has a corresponding task. So the first Noble Truth, he says, is to be completely understood. It's to be fully known. So this is from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, what's considered to be the first formal sermon that the Buddha gave. He said, dukkha is parinyeya. So pari means complete, fully, all around. And nyeya means should be known. So parinyeya, so dukkha should be fully known. In other words, we should actually pay close attention to our dukkha. Normally, when we're experiencing any kind of suffering or discomfort, normally we try to escape it or ignore it or cover it up. But instead, with Buddhist practice, we turn our attention towards our suffering so that we can know it completely. Because through knowing it completely, we can come to understand it. And actually, there's already a shift in the mind. When we turn our attention towards dukkha with the intention to fully know it, that already reduces the sting dramatically. Because when we turn our attention towards it, then we're no longer trying to evade it, which means some of our desire has to be abandoned. In order to turn attention towards dukkha and try to know it fully, it's necessary to let go of at least some of our desire to escape dukkha. Let go of at least some of our desire to avoid our pain. So the duty of the second Noble Truth is that the cause of suffering is to be discarded. It's to be thrown away. So the second Noble Truth is that our suffering is caused by desire. So then we need to practice on abandoning and relinquishing our desire. So another important element of right view is recognizing that desire is inherently harmful. Desire is inherently painful. Normally, when we feel desire, we're fixating on the presumed pleasantness of the object of our desire. But the desire itself is painful. And right view is recognizing the painfulness of desire. It's recognizing that desire hurts. And it hurts right here and right now. If you get what you want, it might be pleasant at some point in the future. But that's beside the point, because wanting is already painful right here and right now. And the third Noble Truth, the cessation of dukkha, is something that's to be personally experienced. It's to be realized. It's to be known for yourself, seen for yourself, experienced personally and individually. So that's another important element of right view, is recognizing that suffering can come to an end and that it can be personally experienced and realized. So some people have the view that it's not possible to let go of all suffering. It's not possible to transcend suffering. Well, that's wrong view. It is possible. It's possible for everyone. Some people have the view that it's possible to transcend suffering, but only other people can do it, not me. So the delusion of inferiority, the delusion that I am somehow less capable of spiritual attainment than others. This also is wrong view, because it's based upon self-identity. It's based upon the idea that I am somehow special and different from others. But actually, everybody is equal in terms of equal capability of attaining enlightenment. So nobody is specially, uniquely incapable of awakening. Everybody is capable of awakening. And of course, the fourth Noble Truth is the Eightfold Path, the path of practice which leads to the attainment of awakening. And for this one, the duty is that it's to be developed, it's to be practiced. So in other words, it's not enough just to know the Dhamma, you also need to actually do it. One of the sayings in the Japanese Zen tradition, which communicates this very clearly, they say, a painting of a rice cake will not satisfy your hunger. In other words, a picture of food will not remove your hunger. You have to actually produce food and eat food in order to relieve your hunger. In the same way, just reading about the Dhamma, knowing the Dhamma is not enough. It's helpful. It's a way of developing a certain degree of right view, but by itself, it's not sufficient. You also need to put into practice what the Buddha talked about. You need to actually do it. Similarly, if you read a book about exercising, your body doesn't get any stronger and healthier. You have to actually follow the instructions in the book and do the exercises. And then your body will slowly start getting stronger. But it doesn't happen quickly even. It takes time and persistence. So it's the same with our mind. You can learn about the Dhamma, but until you start practicing, that learning won't do you very much good. And even when you do start practicing, it takes a long time and a lot of persistence. It's not necessarily a quick and easy process. So that also is an element of right view. And it's recognizing that this is a long process. It's not a quick and easy process. Another way of relating to right view is through the three universal characteristics. In Pali, it's called tilakkhana, the three characteristics that all phenomena share. So all things have the same three characteristics. All things are impermanent. That's anicca, impermanent. All things are unsatisfying. That's dukkha. And all things are impersonal. That's anatta. So everything, without exception, has these same three characteristics. This is another critical element of right view. So whatever you think of as permanent or stable or solid, look more closely, and you'll see that that is constantly changing. There's nothing stable or solid to be found. There's nothing permanent to be found. Whatever you think is satisfying, well, actually think about it. Have you ever had any experience in your life which was permanently, perfectly, eternally, 100% satisfying? Clearly not. I don't need to convince you of this. Just look at your own experiences. We've had experiences which are pretty good, probably. You've probably even had experiences that were fantastic. But they didn't last. Therefore, they're unsatisfying. And even at the time they're happening, if you look more closely, you'll usually find that they weren't 100% satisfying even at the time. So even the greatest peak experiences are rarely more than about 90% satisfying. There's always a certain amount of dukkha mixed in. It's just a matter of degree. So all things are ultimately unsatisfying, both immediately and also in the long run. And finally, everything is impersonal. In other words, nothing whatsoever can be labeled as our permanent self-identity. So whatever you think you are, that's just a temporary condition. Therefore, it's not you. It's not personal. It's just a temporary condition. So all things share these same three characteristics. So this is another element of right view. It's recognizing nothing is permanent, nothing is ultimately satisfying, and nothing is me or mine. So, and there's many other ways that the Buddha spoke about right view, and I could keep going on and on about different ways of understanding right view, but I'd like to focus particularly on the ones I've mentioned so far. So the first one is the right view of causality, which naturally includes within it karma, rebirth, and the possibility of enlightenment. Second is the Four Noble Truths, and focusing on the four duties related to the four truths, and the personal experience, the personal recognition of these four truths, and the three characteristics. So the three universal characteristics, that all things are impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. These are the really critical elements of right view, which are really necessary in order to be able to practice Buddhism with sincerity, diligence, and faith. With these three categories of right view well established in one's mind, then Buddhist practice is natural. Buddhist practice is something which is almost effortless. We don't need to struggle to force ourselves to practice the Buddhist teachings because we recognize their validity and their value. And I should also talk about layers of right view. So the outermost layer of right view is intellectual right view. So this is when you listen to some Dhamma talks and read some books, maybe read the suttas. Definitely you should read the suttas. And you get some intellectual ideas about what the Buddha was talking about. And from one perspective, that's still not quite right view, because it's just an idea. It's just an intellectual construct. But then as you practice the Buddha's teachings, so you follow the precepts, you practice meditation, you develop an experience of the Buddha's teachings, an experience of the Four Noble Truths, an experience of the three characteristics, an experience of causality. Then you start to come to a deeper understanding, a direct experiential understanding. And this is when we start to talk about genuine right view. So it's the right view that comes through actually seeing for yourself what the Buddha was talking about. And the first major culmination of this is one who attains stream entry. And in fact, a stream enterer is sometimes called diṭṭhi-patta. So that means one who has attained right view. So you can't actually say that somebody really has right view until they've attained stream entry. Because that's the point where they've seen the Buddha's teachings clearly enough that they could never believe anything else. They could never believe anything contrary to the Dhamma. And of course, right view is only perfected with the attainment of full enlightenment. So only when one becomes an arhat, a fully enlightened being, is one's right view completely perfected. So then we have these four stages of right view. So the first one is intellectual right view, from just reading the teachings and listening to Dhamma talks. You get some intellectual concepts about the Dhamma. The second is the first vestiges, the first elements of experiential right view. As you practice the Dhamma and you start to come to some direct experience of right view, some direct experience of the Dhamma, then you have a deeper understanding of right view that's based upon personal experience. Then that first irreversible breakthrough, when one becomes a stream enterer, when one sees clearly the truth of the Buddha's words, one sees clearly the truth of the Dhamma, and one can no longer revert to non-Buddhist viewpoints, to non-Buddhist opinions. And then finally, the fourth stage, the perfection of right view, is only with full enlightenment. It's only at that point that right view is complete. So again, it's important to point out that right view starts with the intellectual understanding. Now, if you don't study the Dhamma, then you won't have intellectual right view. And if you don't have intellectual right view, it's very difficult to develop experiential right view. And experiential right view is the necessary precondition for stages of awakening. So really emphasizing the importance of learning the Dhamma. So learning these different aspects of right view and really deeply considering why these are so important to Buddhist practice, why these are such critical foundations for what we're doing. Why is it that these elements of right view are necessary for striving, necessary for really committing oneself enthusiastically to living the Buddha Dhamma. So yesterday, someone came to the monastery So a young person in their 20s who had recently started practicing Buddhist meditation. And they were saying how they weren't comfortable calling themselves a Buddhist because they weren't sure yet that they really believe all the aspects of the Dhamma. And I actually find that quite commendable. There's an honesty there in this person saying, well, I can't really call myself a Buddhist because I don't yet believe all of the central important principles of Buddhist thought. And I was like, well, of course. Well, then naturally you wouldn't call yourself a Buddhist. That might change. As you come to a deeper understanding of the Dhamma, you might come to accept those core principles and define yourself as a Buddhist. And I would say that these central principles are in fact the ones that I've mentioned here. So these three critical categories of right view. And when one comes to an acceptance of these central critical categories of right view, then one can commit oneself to practicing renunciation. One can commit oneself to diving fully into the Dhamma, living a life which is centered around Dhamma as our number one priority. So prioritizing Dhamma above all else. So I think that's all I really have to say at the moment. So I think I'll go ahead and end at this time and take any questions that you might have. So I see a lot of friends have been joining in. So Kumu, Rick, Geeta, Liz, Anita, Vidura, Don, Jayanta, Putrika, Patricia, Dinko, Alex, Andre, Bobby, Diana, Puttavong, Gina, Lucas, Ultimate Blitz, Guravi, and Amaranta. Welcome, all of you. It's really wonderful to see so many friends joining in. So many of you have been following the live streams for months or even since the beginning. So happy to see you're still with us. So the first question I see here is from Bobby. Bobby says, should I throw away all my deluded views and just view and make choices with compassion? We should definitely throw away your deluded views, but you should also cultivate right view. So sometimes people have this belief that Buddhism is about letting go of all views, but that's not correct. Buddhism is about letting go of wrong view and cultivating right view. So we're not trying to let go of all views. We're trying to replace wrong view with right view. And compassion actually is a part of this. Compassion is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's also a natural development from recognizing not self. So when you recognize not self, then you recognize the inseparability of self and other. So naturally, just as you wish for yourself to be free of suffering, you also wish for others to be free of suffering. So that's a natural development as one cultivates wisdom. And also compassion helps you to cultivate wisdom. Through practicing compassion, we create the conditions for wisdom to arise. So these two practices of wisdom and compassion are inseparable. It's sometimes analogized to the two wings of a bird. So you should definitely throw away your deluded views, but you should also actively try to cultivate right view. That's your rudder. It's your compass. It keeps you pointed in the right direction. Then the next question, Ultimate Blitz asks, so is unsatisfying / dukkha a quality of all things or of our relationship to all things? The other two characteristics seem like they could be describing the object in and of itself. So dukkha, it both has the meaning of the pain or discomfort that we feel within ourselves. So that would be our relationship to things. But also it points to the fact that things themselves are unsatisfying. So in other words, you cannot find ultimate happiness through any particular thing or any particular object or activity. So I would say that is a natural characteristic of things. That said, it is interesting that in the Mahayana formulation of the three characteristics, they normally say impermanence, emptiness, and not self, instead of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. But interestingly enough, that winds up meaning the same thing. So whether you use the formulation anicca, dukkha, anatta, or the formulation anicca, sunyata, anatta, you actually wind up reaching the same conclusions and doing the same practices. Because dukkha is a natural outcropping of anicca and anatta. So it's not separable from the other two. Things are unsatisfying partly because they're impermanent and impersonal. That's part of what makes them painful. So next question, Anita says, what is the Pali word for choice? Well, actually here I was translating the word karma. And so the word kamma I was translating as choice. Because kamma literally means action. It means intentional action. So there's necessarily an element of choice in every karma. You're choosing to do something. You're doing it intentionally. And Scott says, it is hard to experience emotional pain without suffering. Sometimes it is overwhelming. How do we come back to the Dhamma? First off, by recognizing you've never left the Dhamma. The Dhamma is always with you. And it's just a matter of whether or not we pay attention to it. So when you're experiencing emotional pain, well, pay attention to it. Recognize this is suffering. This is dukkha. And by acknowledging the dukkha, then you're already back to the Dhamma. Recognize that it's impermanent. It's constantly changing. And once again, you're with the Dhamma. Recognize that it's causal. It's conditional. It arises based upon causes and conditions. And it changes based upon causes and conditions. So with that contemplation of causality, once again, you're back with the Dhamma. The emotional pain might still be there. But by recognizing the Dhamma characteristics of the emotional pain, then you're with the Dhamma. And your relationship to that pain will change. It won't hurt as much. It will still be there, but it won't hurt as much. And also, of course, recognizing that it's impersonal. It's not self. This emotion, this pain, it's not me, not mine, not who I am. It's just something that arises and ceases, something that passes through the mind. And again, then you're back in the Dhamma. So you don't necessarily need to remove unpleasant experiences. You just need to change your relationship to them. Then the next question. So Eric asks, what would you say right view is when it comes to reproductive rights? Is birth control wrong view? Is abortion always murder from the moment of conception? And how should we go about considering reproductive rights in terms of karma or consequence? So this is a complex issue, and it isn't specifically defined anywhere in the suttas. What is right view when it comes to reproductive rights? Well, first off, recognizing that reproductive rights is a political issue. So what does right view say about reproductive rights? Well, it doesn't say anything, actually. It's not an element of right view. Is birth control wrong view? No, I mean, why would that be wrong view? That's making a choice. And choices have results. So if you're comfortable with the result of your choice, then you can make a choice. So acknowledging the choices you're making and the results that those choices will have, that's right view. You asked, is abortion always murder from the moment of conception? Again, this isn't clearly stated anywhere in the suttas. So if you go strictly by what's in the Pali Canon, well, it's impossible to say exactly when a fetus becomes a sentient being. It's not specified anywhere in the suttas. So we don't know. It's not There's no clear answer to that question. So I think the more proper thing here is to practice compassion. Practice compassion towards people who are in difficult situations where they have to make difficult choices. And always err on the side of forgiveness and support of people who are in difficult situations. So not being too quick to jump to condemnation, but rather asking, how can I practice compassion? How can I support people who are faced with difficult choices? Difficult choices where it isn't always clear what the right thing to do is. How can I be there for that person as a support? And if you want to start talking about what laws should be or shouldn't be, it gets into a matter of opinion. But I'm usually of the opinion that criminalizing people doesn't do very much good. Rather, we should try to find what are the root causes of harmful behaviors and how can we address those. So just as an example of this, there's a sutta where the Buddha is talking about crime. He's talking in particular about theft. So the governmental authority was asking what to do about theft in the kingdom. And the Buddha's answer was very simple. He said, give money to the poor. Because if they have money, then they won't have much reason to steal. And then you won't have as much theft in your kingdom. So in that case, rather than saying, oh, theft should be illegal, or it shouldn't be illegal, or it should have this punishment or that punishment, instead it's saying, well, what's the root problem here? The root problem is that people don't have enough money to survive. That's the problem. So address that problem. So similarly, I'm not really sure that criminalizing things is always the right solution. So even if you think that there's too much abortion happening, well, then maybe criminalizing it is not the right answer. Maybe you should look more deeply as to why it's happening. Maybe it's because it's hard for people to raise their children. Maybe it's a lack of child support. Maybe it's a lack of support from society. Maybe it's fear about having to face the difficulties of perhaps a single parent in poverty trying to raise a child. That's a very daunting prospect. I would not want to do that. So I have compassion for people who might be faced with those conditions. So again, looking beyond strictly political, legalistic ideas and rather asking, how can I practice kindness and compassion towards people in difficult conditions? Then Rick asks, what is a skillful attitude or approach toward developing right view? Well, first off, read the suttas. Read all the suttas cover to cover. That's what I would recommend as a start. Discuss those teachings with senior monks, so bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who have been practicing for a long time. Discuss with them what you've learned and ask them for their opinions. And try to directly observe the Buddha's teachings in every moment. So in this way, you'll get the intellectual right view and also the experiential right view. I would say, though, that discussion is a very important part of developing right view. And the Buddha also says this in many suttas. So discussing the Dhamma with others, and especially discussing it with senior monastics, is a very important element. It's easy to read something and misunderstand it, come to a wrong idea about it. And through conversation and discussion, then your wrong views will become highlighted and you can start to break through them. Then Brian asks, what do you do if your pet has fleas? I don't want to kill the fleas, but they're causing suffering to my dog. Does the intention of only to free my pet from harm unskillful? Really try to find non-lethal ways to get rid of the fleas. There actually are many, many ways to get rid of fleas without killing them. But you might have to spend some time digging around on the internet and talking to different people and trying out different solutions before you find something that works. But there are many ways, of non-lethal ways of dealing with fleas and similar problems. So don't go directly to killing. Of course, that's what most vets will try to get you to do. They'll try to get you to go directly to lethal methods, but don't go directly to lethal methods. Really put a lot of time and effort into exploring and experimenting with non-lethal methods first. Because if you do decide to use a lethal method, then you'll be generating mixed karma. You will have the good karma of wanting your pet to have less pain, but you will also have the bad karma of murdering sentient beings. So try not to do that. Try to find non-lethal ways of handling the problem. And you really can't rely on vets for this, because the average vet is not going to even talk about non-lethal solutions. They're just going to go directly to the most expedient way of doing things, which is not necessarily the most moral or virtuous approach. Then Ultimate Blitz asks, I'm tempted to ask about if there is any object which could be absent of dukkha, but that raises the question of what in particular transcends samsara. There is in fact one thing which is absent of dukkha, and that is nibbana. Only nibbana is absent of dukkha. So nibbana does not have the three characteristics. It cannot be spoken, well, it has not self, because everything is not self. But it can't be spoken of as being impermanent, or being spoken of as being dukkha. So those are characteristics of sankharas, but they're not characteristics of nibbana. So nibbana also is, it's not self, it's impersonal. But you can't speak of it as being impermanent, because what is it there that is changing? Nothing can possibly be changing. Sankharas change, but how could that which is not a sankhara, how could that change? Similarly, sankharas are unsatisfying, but how could the unconditioned be unsatisfying? How could it be painful? It isn't possible. But that's more of a scholastic point. Most of us don't have a direct experience of the nibbana dhatu. So it's easier just to say all things are impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. And that applies to the experience of all of us who are not yet awakened. And that's the last of the questions. Any questions from the monastery residents? Okay. So we can go ahead and end the evening with 3 sadhus. So please join your hands in Anjali. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.